hang the portrait under the varnish. People think museums are quiet because the objects are old. It's not the age, it's the secrets. Paintings mutter under their varnish. Frames keep grudges. Every surface remembers a touch it agreed to and one it didn't. My job is to listen. I'm the imaging lead in conservation, X-ray, infrared reflectography, macrofluorescence, the alphabet soup that tells you what a painting looked like before it learned to lie. My name is Nathan. I live 3 floors above a grocery with a wife named Elena who can turn a room into an argument people pay to admire. She's a curator, elegant and composed, the sort of person donors seek when they want to donate taste along with money. We met over a tray of pigments I wasn't supposed to test yet. She said, "You're the only one here making the past louder," and I fell into that sentence like a habit. The year this happened, the museum announced a show of late Baroque portraits from a private collection belonging to a man named Victor Haller. If you read the business press, you know him. If you like your facts salted with gossip, you know him better. He is the kind of patron institutions accept because they prefer art to be funded by a wallet with a family name rather than by a grant that currently hates them. He arrived with cameras and a smile like a verdict. "Your wife," he said at the first walkthrough, as if I had brought her like a portfolio, "understands how to build a narrative." He watched Elena point to a wall and say, "Here, light like dawn," and he looked at her mouth as if words were made there just for him. I told myself men like him look at everyone like that. I told myself I believed it. The centerpiece of the show was a 3/4 portrait of a countess, alleged to have bankrolled an army with her jewelry and her lies. It wore a varnish the color of regret and a provenance thinner than hope, but when we hung it in the lab and turned on the raking light, the paint woke like a person who remembers a better room. I rolled the X-ray over and slid the panel under the imaging head. The plate developed with a patience I envy. What emerged was the familiar ghost map of lead white and bone black, and under the countess's laced bodice, a second face laid down first and then painted over. This happens more than anyone admits. Artists reuse canvases, models go out of favor, a lover becomes a mistake. Still, the underimage had the arrogance of a story that wants to be told. The cheekbones were different. The tilt of the head was modern, not style, attitude. When I pulled the infrared, the underdrawing resolved into a mouth I knew. My hand went cold on the mouse. It wasn't perfect, but the arc of the jaw, the angle of the brow. If you slide your hand along my wife's face when she's half asleep and honest, you learn its topography. The painting knew it too. Elena walked into the lab carrying a donor list and the particular fatigue of diplomacy. "Tell me something that isn't a problem," she said, and I turned the monitor. She leaned in. Her body changed not at the sight of the old woman everyone would see, but at the ghost underneath. She didn't speak for a beat too long. "Coincidence," she said finally, and kissed the air near my temple. "Everything with a mouth wants to look like someone alive." "Does that include men who buy whole rooms so their names sound better?" I asked. She smiled without humor, "Only if the room acquiesces." I should have told her then that Victor's attention had become architecture in the galleries he toured with her. Instead, I switched to tech. "The top portrait is varnish thick," I said. "It's yellowed. I can take a sample to see if it's a 19th century edition. If so, we can negotiate a thinning at least. And I want to build a visible light sandwich for the underimage." She nodded. "Email the report to collections, copy me." She paused. "Don't copy him." That night I came home to find a bottle of wine on our kitchen table with no card and a message on Elena's phone I had zero right to see and every instinct to read. "Your eye for placement is devastating. Dinner after the walkthrough. V." She walked out of the bathroom in a robe that knows my hands. "He wants to be seen listening to me," she said without prompting. I want his money to behave. Don't make me fight you and the board at the same time. Say no to dinner, I said. I said no to dinner, she said, and her voice was almost gentle. I didn't say no to a 30-minute strategy session that happens to include food. You hear yourself, I asked. You're dressing a meeting like alibi. She put her hands on my shoulders, thumbs warm, palms firm, the way she anchors me when I start confusing detail with truth. Nathan, she said, I am not in love with him. Are you curious? I asked quietly. She closed her eyes for a second. I am curious about why men like him keep trying to buy time from women like me, she said, and about how to make them donate years without pretending they get any. We made love on the kitchen floor like a correction we both wanted. Her robe slid. The tile was impertinent and cold and perfect. We were hot and not careful with our noise. After, she lay with her cheek on my thigh and traced the scar I got when a frame fell on me during an install. You live under things, she said. I live in front of them. We meet where we can. The next morning the lab smelled like solvent and weather. Collections replied to my report with the tone of someone who wants your data but not your adjectives. Do not thin without lender consent, it said. Lender consent was Victor's signature and Elena's report. What we had was Victor's charm and Elena's plan. He started coming to the lab. To see the science, he said, as if science were decorative. He pointed at the monitor and said, that is sexy. He said it like he thought saying so made him interesting. He stood too close to my wife when she showed him how the waveband revealed the underdrawing. He could see the underface. He pretended he couldn't. Layers, he said, and smiled at Elena as if the word were currency he could spend. The camera in the lab isn't for theft. It's for liability. I never thought I'd hate the angle of my own ceiling, but I watched the footage that night because I had liked myself less all week. In the gray view, Victor leaned over the console while Elena moved the slider, and in the reflection of the monitor I saw his hand brush her wrist. It wasn't a grope. It was an audition. She moved her arm and did not say a word. He laughed like someone who believes the only rules are the ones he set. Saturday evening, he hosted a preview dinner in the founder's room. The windows overlook the park. The table is a silver thesis. He placed name cards with the subtlety of a wedding planner who knows exactly whom he's seating next to whom. I stood in the wings because there is no other place for a man like me to stand when money leverages art into permission. Elena's dress was dark green and merciless. Mine was black and functional. At dessert, donors drifted toward the mezzanine to see the portraits lit like decisions. The Countess glowed. The underimage slept. Victor gestured to me. Turner, he said, he refuses to learn my last name isn't a verb. Show us the trick. Let the people see the skeleton under the dress. It's not a trick, I said. It's mapping. I looked at Elena, and she gave me a small nod that meant, not now. I said, we'll include technical images in the catalog and a station in the education gallery for IR before and after. He held my gaze a second too long and then looked past me to the woman at his left. You see, he said, smiling like a story, we tell the truth responsibly. I slept badly. At 3 a.m. I went back to the lab and stood under the lamp where paintings confess. The Countess watched me unemotionally. The ghost watched me with my wife's face, which is to say, ambiguous and real. The monitor slept. I woke it and pulled the file again. I slid from varnish to ground to graphite like a man checking whether in a city he no longer trusts. Monday, I received an email from security. After-hours access, founder's request from lender. Victor wanted the room from 10 to midnight for a quiet walk. I forwarded it to Elena. She replied, I'll be there. I wrote, don't. She wrote, I will. I didn't follow. I am not my worst cliché. I moved the X-ray plates and pretended to care about a Dutch still life's repaired bruises. I stared at a snapped pearl under paint and thought about what breaks and what shines anyway. At 11:57, the lab camera pinged. Motion. The feed showed the lab door open, dark beyond, then a flick of bare ankle and the hem of a dress. Not Elena's green, that night blue silk. I told myself not to check timed key logs, they checked themselves. Founders 2302 Hauler. Founders 2303 A. Markov. My wife's name is Elena Markov because she kept it on purpose. She says names are frames and she won't be reframed by tradition. Lab 2357, A. Markov. She came in alone and shut the door. She walked to the monitor, turned on the underimage and stood facing my ghost wife in the screen. She pressed her palm to the glass, then lowered her head and laughed once, silently, like mercy. I waited. When she came home, I was awake with my face rehearsed. "Tell me if I need to hate you," I said. "I need you to hate him," she said. She sat on the bed and took off her earrings like courage. "He asked me to stay alone in the founder's room after everyone left. He called it a tradition for benefactors and curators. He said history likes its rehearsals private. He touched my wrist. I moved his hand. He smiled like we were collaborating. He said, 'No cameras in there.' I said, 'There are eyes anyway.' He said, 'You're clever.' I said, 'I'm tired.' He said, 'I can fix that.' I left. I went to look at the face that makes me honest. 'Why didn't you tell me you were going to meet him?' 'Because you would have followed me,' she said. 'Because I wanted to prove to myself I could leave without being rescued. It's ugly. It's also true.' I loved her unbearably then, which has never been a guarantee of forgiveness. I went to the kitchen and ran water over my wrists like pain. 'We can cut the black room,' I said, meaning the founders' myth, the hours without cameras, the narrative donors use to touch air they think they own. 'You can cut it,' she said, 'but you can't cut the impulse, so we trap it in the light.' We made a plan that felt like art and revenge in equal parts. 2 nights before opening, I asked lighting to reconstruct the salon scheme in the lab, and in Gallery B, we built a conservation display with a mirror set just so, as if it were a design choice, not an ethics tool. On opening night, we would give Victor what he wanted, an underimage reveal, but we would choose the timing. The Countess would dim. The underface would bloom. The crowd would gasp. Victor would witness himself looking at a face that wasn't his to borrow, and the city would clap and think it was for art. I also did a small, illegal thing. I placed a micro camera not in the founder's room that would get me fired for good reasons, but in the corridor just outside, angled to catch only the threshold. I would watch hands, not mouths. I would watch proximity behave. On opening night, the museum wore its most expensive honesty. The donors glittered. The interns pretended to be invisible and were not. In the gallery, the portraits waited like judges. I stood at the back near the guard's podium. Elena stood near the Countess with her hands folded the way she does when she's choosing who gets the next sentence. Victor stood within arm's reach, casual, polite, winter in his watch. Elena nodded to lighting. The room cooled. The Countess softened. The underimage lifted like a negative becoming photograph. People made the good noise, the oh that means they've been made to feel and forgiven for it. Victor turned to Elena. His hand moved. He had to put it somewhere. That's what hands do when they're startled. He placed it in his pocket. Progress is sometimes a muscle you don't know you're clenching and then unclench in front of witnesses. After the reveal, he asked to see the founder's room. "Just a moment to breathe with it," he said. "Just us three, the portrait, the institution, the patron." Elena said, "Of course," with a smile that looked almost kind. I watched the corridor feed. At the threshold he reached. She didn't step back, she stepped sideways. His hand touched air where she had been and closed on his own jacket in the camera's little square. She went inside first. He followed 2 beats later. He stayed 8 minutes. He came out alone, cheeks pink, mouth a little smaller. Elena came out a minute after that and walked straight to me. "Gates closed," she said, borrowing our private airport story for the museum. We left together before midnight. At home, we were not gentle. She climbed onto me with the victory of a person who chose and liked the choice. I held her with the hunger of a man who had watched an old building learn something and wanted to honor the lesson. When we were breathless and shaking, she pressed our foreheads together and said, "Do you think the face under the paint was ever meant to be seen?" "I think it was meant to be remembered," I said. In the weeks that followed, the show drew lines around the block. The underimage story hit the papers with photographs and little arrows and breathless paragraphs about science making the past confess. No one wrote about the corridor outside the founder's room. They wrote about the mirror in the education gallery and how children loved seeing what wasn't visible before. Victor donated a second painting to the museum, not alone. He did it quietly, as if the city had taught him volume. We didn't become saints. Donors still try to buy posture. Curators still need checks. I still put cameras where I can and write reports that translate desire into procedure. But Elena and I added one rule no one else sees. We call it varnish. If either of us says varnish at home, it means, tell me the part of the story you're tempted to gloss. We stop and do it. Sometimes it leads to the couch, where truth turns our bodies into a better argument. Sometimes it leads to a fight we finish because we can. The Countess will hang long after we're done making museums honest. Under her, a face that resembles my wife will keep being a rumor with bones. I visit it in the mornings before the public arrives. I turn on the lamp that flatters no one. I look at the underdrawing and think about what we cover and what we unveil, and how sometimes the only thing that saves a painting is the person who refuses to be flattered by the top layer. Last Sunday, a kid in the gallery asked me if ghosts are real. "In museums," he said, eyes full of mischief and boredom in equal measure. "Yes," I said, "but most of them are still alive." He didn't get it, he will. At night, in our apartment, Elena sometimes stands at the window with her hair up and her shoulders bare, the city making a frame and me making the light. I walk behind her and put my hands low on her waist, and she leans back into me with a trust that is the opposite of varnish. We don't catalog that. We live it. We let the room remember us. And if a secret mutters anywhere in the dark, it does so in a language we share.